Hello, welcome to Lecture 5, Part 2 for Life in the Universe. This video will conclude Lecture 5, what we would cover on the 5th class meeting, if we were meeting in person, and we'll be doing more of Unit B. So we have another minor figure to look at before we move to our next major figure. It's an Italian named Giordano Bruno, who was born a couple of years after Thomas Digges and 5 years after Copernicus died. Similar to the situation with Digges, he also believed in an infinite universe, and we know for sure he went a bit further, thinking of the stars as suns, orbited by their own planets, many, if not all of which were inhabited, according to him. Bruno was not primarily an astronomer. He was a bit of a renegade theologian, so his speculations about the universe are scattered throughout his theological writings. And he was very much a nonconformist. He met a nasty end. He was burned at the stake for heresy. Although his astronomical beliefs probably did not help him, they would not have been the primary reason he was executed. He would have been considered a heretic by pretty much everybody. For example, he denied the divinity of Christ, something that went over really well in the Europe of 1600. And he was actually continuously having to move around Europe. It'd move in one place, and the local authorities, whether Catholic or Protestant, would get sick of him and he'd have to leave. And as it turns out, he was executed by Catholics, but somebody was going to burn him for heresy, and Protestants could have done it just as well. Anyway, because it was not primarily because of his astronomical beliefs that he was executed, I think it's wrong to consider him a martyr of science, as he sometimes is. But I think it probably is correct to consider him a martyr for freedom of thought. Well, our next major historical figure is a contemporary of Digges and Bruno, born in 1546, again 3 years after Copernicus died, in what is now Denmark. Apparently, Denmark and Norway were a single state at the time. We usually call him by the Latinized version of his first name, which I have heard pronounced Tycho, and Tuco. I'm not sure what's right, but he's dead. He can't correct us. I usually say Tycho, but I will occasionally say Tycho. You'll know who I'm talking about. Anyway, Tycho, as it turns out, was the greatest observational astronomer before the invention of the telescope, the last great geocentric astronomer, and one of the most colorful figures in the history of science. I've chosen this particular portrait of him for a couple of reasons. This came from the frontispiece of one of his books. One is, if you look at his nose here, you notice his nose looks a little funny. The artist, I think, was trying to be both flattering and accurate here at the same time. When Tycho was a university student, this is when something bad happened to his nose. You might think that college life these days can maybe sometimes get a little wild. There's another institution in the Pioneer Valley that has a rather unflattering nickname, Zoomass up in Amherst, because of what tends to go on there, either when the Red Sox, the Patriots do something good, or when something bad happens to, like maybe those evil Yankees beat the Red Sox, or around St. Patrick's Day weekend and so forth. Believe me, college life today is nothing like it was at this time. Tycho had a rivalry with another student. It was a cousin of his, and the rivalry apparently was partially over a dispute over who was the better mathematician, kind of a nerdy thing to argue about. Anyway, they weren't on friendly terms, and apparently they encountered each other one night in a tavern. Unfriendly words were exchanged, swords were drawn, and in the resulting duel, Tycho's cousin cut his nose off. And for the remainder of his life, he wore a prosthetic metal nose. Supposedly, he wore a brass one for everyday use and had a gold and silver one for special occasions. Incidentally, in the books on which Game of Thrones is based, collectively the books are called A Song of Ice and Fire. There's a major character who suffers a similar injury, and in the TV show, I guess because the special effects budget would have been too high, and the actor was not willing to have his nose cut off, they made the injury not as bad in the show. Another reason I picked this particular illustration is the arch overhead has, right here is the Brahe family coat of arms, and other families on his father's side. This is mother's family's coat of arms and other families on that side. And the two that I just highlighted, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, might sound kind of familiar to you, because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are the names of minor characters in Hamlet, which was written in the around near the end of Tycho's life, and takes place in Denmark. There is an astronomer named Peter Usher who wrote a book called Hamlet's Universe, in which he argues that the correct interpretation of Hamlet is as an allegory of the controversy between the Copernican and Ptolemaic worldviews, which was a major part of the intellectual environment of Europe at the time. I think there's a lot more than that to Hamlet, but the argument that there are astronomical references in Hamlet are very strong, and I'll give you an example of just one. Early in the play, some of the castle guards are talking about the conditions under which they saw Hamlet's father's ghost the night before, and they refer to a star being in a certain part of the sky. Based on the description of that play, that star is a supernova that was seen in 1572 that we know about mostly because of Tycho's observations of it. Anyway, as an adult, Tycho had the patronage of the King of Denmark, who gave him an island to rule as his own. He built a castle on the island, which he named Uraniborg, which means Castle of the Heavens. This was before the invention of the telescope, but he equipped it with the best astronomical instruments available, including some that he invented. His castle also had a dwarf jester. I don't know how common it really was, but you may know the stereotype that nobles in the Middle Ages and Renaissance would employ a dwarf to amuse them. He really did. He also had a pet reindeer, which came to a tragic end when it fell down a staircase while drunk. There's a lot wrong with that statement, but I guess the point is, if you have a reindeer, keep it away from the alcohol and the stairs. Anyway, when the King of Denmark died, Tycho did not get around along with his successor. So he left Denmark and went to Prague, which was then in what was called the Holy Roman Empire, which has been said is a triple oxymoron. It was not holy, it was not Roman, and it was not an empire, being a loose collection of states in Central Europe, including most of what's now Germany and what's now the Czech Republic, which is where Prague is. And it's there where he met his end. And there's a traditional story about his death, which is almost certainly not true in its details, but it's a good story, so I'll tell you. Now, the story goes is that he went to a dinner celebration being given by a superior nobleman and did not want to offend his host by leaving the table before his host did, nor did he want to offend his host by refusing the food and drink that kept being brought. So according to the story, he kept drinking and drinking, and rather than going to use the facilities, holding it until his bladder burst and then died from resulting infection a few days later. Story is probably not true. One interesting thing, his remains have been exhumed a couple of times, and in one of these exhumations, it was discovered that the hair in his beard, right close to his chin, had unusually high levels of mercury, indicated that he was exposed to quite a lot of mercury right before he died. Perhaps he was taking too much medicine containing elemental mercury, which was used as a medicine at that time, to treat his bladder ailment. Mid-50s, he was a little young, but maybe prostate problems. And anyway, he may have accidentally overdosed in mercury from that. Anyway, I like to tell the traditional story anyway, even though it's probably not true, because even though you probably won't watch this, because I'm not going to post it, let you know when it's posted, but I'm recording this on Friday afternoon. And knowing that there are some college student celebrations involving the consumption of certain beverages, some of which you need to be a certain minimum age to legally consume. The point is, don't risk what, according to the story, happened to Tycho happening to you. Moderation is the key, although I guess if we can keep you from large gatherings to keep the spread of COVID down, we'll be doing good. Anyway, Tycho's importance for us largely comes from two things. One is he made a lot of really, really good observations of the positions of stars and planets, in particular Mars. Many of his observations, the positions are accurate to 1 to 2 arc minutes. So let's make sure we know what that refers to. There are 360 degrees in a circle, we know that. There are 60 arc minutes in a degree, and there are 60 arc seconds in an arc minute. We call them arc minutes and arc seconds so we don't confuse them with minutes and seconds of time. And incidentally, whenever I use this little hash mark, 1 for arc minutes, 2 for arc seconds, that will always mean arc minutes and arc seconds. I will never use that to mean feet and inches. In any event, 1 to 2 arc minutes is the physical limit of the human eye without telescopic aid. So these observations were as good as they were going to be before the telescope was developed, less than a decade after Tycho died. So unfortunately, he just missed being able to use telescopes. The other bit that's important for us, let's see here. What's my computer doing? Oh, there we go. Okay, is that he didn't like either Copernicus or Ptolemy. He didn't really like Ptolemy, but he rejected the heliocentric idea, both for observational reasons, to failure to see stellar parallax, which probably carried more weight with him, but also for theological reasons. An example of the theological argument he made against Copernicus. In the Old Testament, in the book of Joshua, during the siege of Jericho, there's a passage where Joshua commands the sun to stand still in the sky, and it supposedly does. Well, Tycho said, well, it says that he told the sun to stand still, not for the earth to stop rotating. Therefore, the sun is what's really moving. And I guess the counter argument to that how else would you describe it to the audience several thousand years ago when the book of Joshua was written, is apparently that that didn't carry much weight with him, but I think it's the way we'd all interpret it now. In any event, being unhappy with both Ptolemy and Copernicus, he came up with his own system, which he did not work out in nearly as much detail as Ptolemy and Copernicus did theirs, but at least he laid out the schematics of it, shown here. And except for the labels and the highlighting colors I put on here, this is from Tycho's book where he first described that. And again, he put a face on the sun. So it's a geocentric system. So the Earth is stationary at the center. He's got the moon going around the Earth. Remember, we pretty much never got that part wrong. He has the sun going around the Earth, but then he has Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn going around the sun. and then he still has a sphere of fixed stars. So it's a geocentric model that has aspects of Copernicus in it. So it's kind of a hybrid between Ptolemy and Copernicus. Now, in Ptolemy and Copernicus, we talked about Venus. So let's see what Venus does here for Tycho. If Tycho is right, Venus can be between the Earth and the Sun, as it can for both Ptolemy and Copernicus. But it can also get behind the Sun as seen from the Earth, which, if you remember, it can't do that for Ptolemy, but it can for Copernicus. So again, something to remember. That's something we'll probably get into in the next lecture, where I think we're going to try and cram both Kepler and Galileo into lecture 6. All right. Here are your attendance. Here's your attendance secret code for this video. Crazy weather. I know one saying I've heard about New England weather, heard it for some other places in the world as well. There's a joke: if you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a minute, it will change. Well, this is the biggest change I think I've ever noticed in weather. This was this past Labor Day weekend in Denver, where you can see they had a very hot Labor Day weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. The next day, Tuesday, it snowed, and accumulating snow, not just a few flurries. So that is some pretty crazy weather. And I know I'm glad fall is coming along. Fall is my favorite season. I'm glad it's getting cooler. But my wife would be very upset if it got that cold that fast, because her garden wouldn't be happy. And I want my wife's garden to be happy, because if it is, then she's happy. And if she's happy, I'm happy. Okay, I will let you know when the lecture 6 videos become available. But until then, take care.